Yeah, death is literally its first name. Even if you're like, well, everything in Australia is upside down, so maybe it means the opposite. Well, guess what the opposite of Death Adder is? That's right, Life Subtractor. You just can't win, they're always two steps ahead. Stonefish. Stonefish are a dumb fish with an even dumber design because even though they hate being poked by children, they nevertheless decide to disguise themselves as a rock in shallow coastal areas. Like, bro, everyone's going to want to flip you over. That's like hating the microwave, but you disguise yourself as a cinnamon bun and then hide in the fridge. Funnel web spiders. Loves wearing functional boots. Redback spiders. Loves comfortable seating and a good postcard. Blue ring octopus. Shoots up to 8 electric destructo discs at a time. Drop bear. A carnivorous relative of the koala bear that's often attracted to barbecues and other public cookouts. Has been known to plummet up to 5 meters from eucalyptus trees onto passers-by. Has particularly sensitive hearing and becomes enraged upon hearing non-Australian accents or about American tipping culture. Its favorite food is Woolworth's generic sausages placed diagonally on a slice of plain white bread, but will also settle for hundreds and thousands on a thick coat of margarine. Hates Vegemite. Box jellyfish. Loves the beach, but is very predatory and has been known to lure half-naked girls back to their lair by offering them free henna tattoos. A lot of people think that you're supposed to treat a jellyfish sting by peeing on the affected area, but this doesn't actually do anything, and at the end of the day, you're just another weird guy at the beach peeing on their daughter's leg. Irukandji jellyfish. Along with being very painful, if one of these stings you, you can develop such a severe sense of impending doom that people beg their doctor to just end their suffering.
I gotta admit.
Telstra. Similar to the Irukandji jellyfish, they make you want to kill yourself. S tier. It kills everyone. And also happens to start with S. Stingrays. See, I haven't even said anything about them yet, and you're already sad. S tier. For sad. The sun. As a Tasmanian, I spent a lot of time looking at the sun growing up, and I remember getting more and more freckles every year until I moved to Canada, and then it just stopped. Which made me think, oh no, I was dying. The good news is, I've heard that girls think freckles are pretty cute, and I'm sure this is because girls love bad boys, and when they see a guy with freckles, they think, damn, that guy's tougher than the sun. So yeah, S tier for sunscreen. So, seeing as we're all currently quarantining ourselves and are therefore naturally protected from both girls and the sun, and the virus thing, the only thing left to worry about is running out of things to watch on the computer. And with today's sponsor, ExpressVPN, in just one click, you can reroute your IP address to over 94 different countries.
Actually, hold on a second. I'm gonna look something up. What's it called? Fever Radio? Something like that? I don't know. Never mind.
This video is brought to you by Hunt a Killer. If you're a fan of mystery, those who attended the conference, the demo wouldn't surface until 2017, when Johnny Quasar's voice actor uploaded the footage himself to his YouTube channel. Kablam! Final episode. Nickelodeon's Kablam is rather obscure in the grand scheme of things, but unavoidable in the lost media community due to how elusive it seems to be. The show avoided receiving any home media releases, was rarely rebroadcasted, and may never be re-released officially due to licensing issues. The most elusive part of the show, however, was its series finale, Just Chillin'. Due to the show's obscurity and poor documentation, even finding evidence of its existence was difficult, until the episode re-uploaded in 2016. This was because the show's creator, Mark Merrick, eventually confirmed its existence, and announced that he'd be posting them in full to his website. Cleopatra. Cleopatra is a 1917 silent film starring Theda Bara. Considered one of the actress's most daring roles, It became infamous at the time for posing in risque, nearly nude outfits. The film was eventually targeted by church organizations, who began attempting to obtain all copies of the film to destroy it for obscenity. Though historians attempted to save as many copies as they could, the last known copies of the film were said to have been destroyed in a studio vault fire in the 1930s, making it one of the holy grails of vintage film. El Apostol. Released in 1917, El Apostol is considered the world's first feature animated film. Produced in Argentina, the film consists of a total of 58,000 frames, resulting in a runtime of 70 minutes. The film was a satirical take on the then Argentine presidents. It was well received by critics at the time, and was a commercial success. Sadly, however, the only known copy was destroyed when its producer's film studio burned down. Crack Master. Crack Master, or Cracks, is a short from Sesame Street about a young girl making friends with the cracks on her walls, who would form into animals and such. The search began in 2008 when a man named John Armin posted online about his memories of this short and how it haunted him, similar to the search for Clockman. I also have a mini documentary about this search, and it's quite bizarre how it all resolves. Doctor Who. Nearly 100 episodes of the beloved science fiction show Doctor Who are currently missing. This is due to the BBC having a habit of reusing tapes for new episodes, scrubbing the previous footage from existence. By the 1970s, home media became popular, and the BBC began searching for these episodes through television stations and private collectors. Although a good amount was recovered, Doctor Who remains one of the most famous cases of lost media. Mickey Mouse in Vietnam. Mickey Mouse in Vietnam is an unauthorized animated short film created in 1968. With a runtime of only 1 minute, it was made in protest of the Vietnam War as part of the underground comics movement. It depicts Mickey Mouse being joyfully recruited for the Vietnam War, before being shot in the head. It was shown around various short film festivals at the time, winning several awards, before never being seen by the public again. The film was thought to be lost for decades, though every so often a private copy would re-emerge at film festivals. It wouldn't be fully released to the public, however, until a student recovered a version of the film from a scrap bin of his college. The film's official title has since been discovered to be Short Subject. Drake and Josh pilots. Nickelodeon's Drake and Josh is one of the most beloved kids-oriented sitcoms of all time. Though the first episode is considered by fans as the pilot, the actual pilot was produced in 2001, before Nickelodeon had greenlit the show. At one point, the entire pilot was uploaded to YouTube by show creator Dan Schneider himself, though for unknown reasons, he eventually privated the video. Over the years, mirrors of the pilot have resurfaced online, though they have consistently been taken down by Nickelodeon and Viacom, providing a possible explanation as to why Schneider had to private his upload. Empress Chung. Empress Chung is a 2005 animated feature film, developed as a personal project by the film's director, Nelson Shin. Spending over a decade in just pre-production, the film is notable for having been produced and released simultaneously in both North and South Korea. With a $6.5 million budget, the film was a financial failure in the United States, and to this day has yet to see a home release. There has been speculation that a DVD release does exist in North Korea, though no evidence of this has materialized beyond word of mouth. The Backyardigans pilot. Before The Backyardigans was greenlit by Nickelodeon, the characters first appeared as a live-action pilot filmed at Nickelodeon Studios in the late 90s. Titled Me and My Friends, the characters are instead portrayed in full-body suits with minor visual differences. Not much else is known about the pilot, as the only known footage has a cumulative runtime of 3 seconds. Marilyn Manson's Groupie. With a long history of being a provocateur, it should be no surprise that when Marilyn Manson made his first step into filmmaking, he would produce something unsettling. Shot in one night, sometime between 1996 and 1998, Marilyn Manson's unreleased short film, Groupie, is said to have been so perverted and violent that his manager begged him to never release it, believing it could end Manson's career, or even lead to his conviction. Filmed at an actual house party with unwitting guests, Manson tortures an actor he hired to play the role of a groupie to a crowd who have no reason to believe it's staged. It's said that at one point the groupie is tied up. Somehow Manson introduces a firearm, and a violent fight breaks out, causing bloodshed. Though Manson at one point teased a release of the film in 2016, for the most part, it seems that Groupie has been locked away forever, in fear of jeopardizing Manson's career. Sun Moon. During the peak of Sailor Moon's popularity in the early 90s, Toei struggled to seal redistribution deals in the North American markets. As a result, they held a bidding war to determine who would deliver the franchise to America. One of these participants was Toon Makers, an animation and advertising company that worked primarily on feature films. Rather than producing a cost-effective English dub, they instead pitched a 17-minute-long pilot that only had half the episode featuring animation, replacing the other half with Power Rangers-esque live-action segments. This was, rather unsurprisingly, rejected. Though some animation cells and scenes have resurfaced, the full pilot has yet to leak online. Sailor Mouth, the uncensored version. Sailor Mouth is an infamous episode of SpongeBob SquarePants, due to it largely revolving around the main characters swearing, albeit bleeped out with dolphin sounds. According to SpongeBob's voice actor, Tom Kenny, they were told to use substitute words, but the voice actors found it too difficult, so they actually cussed. These original recordings have yet to resurface, though are said to exist somewhere in Nickelodeon's archives. GTA 64. In E3 1999, a port of the original Grand Theft Auto for the N64 was debuted privately. Supposedly halfway completed at the time of the event, it would have had enhanced graphics and new levels, though for unknown reasons was quietly shelved. So far, only alleged screenshots have surfaced from the game, with no footage ever making it to the public, and no confirmation that these screenshots are anything but mock-ups. American Dog. Before Disney's film Bolt was Bolt, it was known as American Dog, and helmed by the director of Lilo & Stitch. However, director Chris Sanders and the executives at Disney had far different ideas of what the film should be. The original plot of the film was far more surreal than what it was reworked into, and when executives attempted to meddle with the concept, Sanders rejected their changes. Eventually, he was removed from the project altogether, causing him to leave Disney for DreamWorks instead. Very few production materials from this period of the film have been released online, likely due to contractual agreements. Newt. Originally intended to be released in the summer of 2011, not much is actually known about Pixar's Newt. The plot synopsis is said to have been similar to the film Rio, which was released after this film was cancelled. According to Pixar's president, Edwin Campbell, he stated that the idea was scrapped during pre-production, eventually being replaced with Inside Out. It's unknown how much of the film was completed before cancellation, though concept art and supposed music from the film have surfaced online. Kurt Cobain's Ren and Stimpy. Before Kurt Cobain found success with his band Nirvana, he supposedly attempted to write a theme song for the series Ren and Stimpy. According to Stimpy's voice actor, Billy West, Kurt visited Spumco Animation headquarters to perform a song he'd written about the show.
Let you stay there. One day the scraggly kid comes in and said he wanted to write a song for Ren and Stimpy, and they said, yeah, that's great, and they threw it in the wastebasket, and it was Kurt Cobain.
Oh, shit!
There is no evidence of this event ever occurring, and it's possible that the voice actor just made it up as a joke. However, some speculate that a demo of this song may exist somewhere in his archives. Astrology with Squidward. These were a series of little-known shorts that Nickelodeon would air sometime in the early 2000s, showing Squidward explaining some of the different zodiac signs: Cancer, Taurus, Gemini, Pisces, Sagittarius, and Leo. This is a unique piece of lost media because it was rumored that the other zodiac signs also had their own shorts, but they were lost. However, we now know that they never actually existed. Sesame Street, 847. This is a long-lost episode of Sesame Street that is notable for being apparently frightening to young viewers. It featured Margaret Hamilton reprising her role as the Wicked Witch of the West, losing her broom in Sesame Street. She then tries to find it, resulting in all sorts of shenanigans. Though there are a few images online, the full episode was only aired once, and has never been officially released. Sesame Workshop also does not plan on including it in their big archive for the AAPB. Yeah Yeah Beavis 1. From June 1989 to September 1990, a strange game known as Yeah Yeah Beavis 1 has been seen in multiple gaming magazines. No one knows what this game truly is, as it was never released. Though there are multiple theories, a game called Yeah Yeah Beavis 1 doesn't seem to exist as of now. The suicide of Christine Chubbuck. Christine Chubbuck was an American television news reporter who, in 1974, tragically ended her own life. After years of struggling with depression, confounded by a recent operation that hindered her chances of having a child, she brought a revolver to her workplace and committed suicide on live television. Recordings of this incident do exist, being in the possession of the station's owner, Robert Nelson. In 2016, it was given to a large law firm to ensure that it was never lost. However, it's been made clear that there are no plans for the footage to ever be made publicly available. The basement tapes. In 1999, two students from Columbine High School carried out one of the deadliest school shootings in history. Prior to the event, the two recorded a series of videos that contained disturbing material, such as their motives and a kill list. These recordings, dubbed the basement tapes, were later recovered by Jefferson County and destroyed in subsequent years. There is an hour-long video of the basement tapes on YouTube, but according to the family members of the victims, the total runtime of all the footage is around 3 to 4 hours. The rest is likely gone for good. The death of Steve Irwin. Steve Irwin, nicknamed the Crocodile Hunter, was a popular wildlife expert and television personality. On September 4th, 2006, while filming a documentary in Great Barrier Reef, Irwin was attacked by a stingray. The attack would tragically prove to be fatal, as Irwin succumbed to the multiple injuries to his chest. Prior to filming, Irwin instructed his team to never stop recording, even if the situation became dire. As a result, the entire aftermath, including his actual moment of death, were captured on film. This footage was first given to authorities, before it was returned to Irwin's family. All copies of the footage are said to have been destroyed, including his final words, "I'm dying." The death of Owen Hart. Owen Hart was a professional wrestler who was regarded as one of the World Wrestling Foundation's best in-ring performers of all time. On May 23rd, at Over the Edge 1999, Hart accidentally triggered an early release of his harness, causing him to drop 78 feet. Though fans didn't know it at the time, they had just witnessed a man fall to his death. Footage of the incident does exist within the WWE archives, though it's unlikely they'll be released out of respect to Hart and his family. While the event was televised, a pre-recorded promotional video was played during the incident, ruling out any possibility of an at-home viewer owning a recording. So far, only audio recordings and photographs have made it to the public. Audio of Timothy Treadwell. Timothy Treadwell, also known as the Grizzly Man, was a bear enthusiast who was mauled to death while camping with his girlfriend at a national park. While it's unknown how the incident started, the couple were found dead, with the attack recorded on their video camera. Because the camera's lens cap was still on, only audio of the incident exists. According to an Alaskan state trooper, the tape began and ended when he was being mauled. In a documentary about Treadwell's life, the director films himself listening to the tape after being given access to it by one of Treadwell's ex-girlfriends. Disturbed, he tells her she should destroy it, though she instead chose to store it in a deposit box. Though copies are known to exist, it's unlikely that the audio will ever be released to the public. Dross vs. D'Lo Brown. In a 1999 wrestling match between Dross and D'Lo Brown for WWF SmackDown, Brown accidentally executed a powerbomb finisher incorrectly, fracturing Dross's neck vertebrae. Although Dross was rushed to the hospital and thankfully survived, the injury left him as a permanent quadriplegic, ending his wrestling career forever. The men reconciled days after the incident, remaining friends. They both agreed, however, that the footage should never see the light of day, and it was placed forever in the WWE vaults. The footage of Armin Maiwes. In 2001, Bernd Brandes visited Armin Maiwes after the two had met on a fantasy cannibalism forum. Maiwes had a fetish for cannibalism, while Brandes had a fetish for being devoured. Upon meeting, Brandis was consensually murdered, as Maiwis filmed himself dismembering Brandis's body, desecrating it before eating it. The tapes were long sought after by gore websites, causing it to be held onto tightly by German authorities. 4 alleged screenshots have surfaced online, though their validity has never been proven. Given their disturbing nature, with journalists who viewed the tape during trial needing therapy, it's unlikely the tapes will ever be released. The audio of Isis Sagawa. Isis Sagawa is a convicted Japanese cannibal who, while studying abroad in France, filmed himself murdering his classmate before cooking her remains. Due to a variety of international legal issues, Sagawa is actually free to this day, becoming a surprise celebrity in Japanese pop culture. The recording of the incident, said to include the actual murder and stagings with the corpse, was confiscated by French authorities and will likely never be released. The audio of the Moors murderers. Serial killer couple Ian Brady and Myra Hindley committed a series of acts that have since been titled the Moors Murders. In order to reminisce of their crimes, which included torturing prepubescent children, they maintained audio recordings of many of their victims. For obvious reasons, they will likely never see the light of day. The sex tape of Mickey Mouse. In 1936, during Walt Disney's birthday party, 2 animators created a gag animation in which Mickey and Minnie Mouse were having sex. Upon its presentation, Walt feigned laughter, asking for the 2 responsible for it to come forward. He then fired them and had all copies of the animation destroyed. It's unknown how true the story is, originating from an already dubious biographical account of the animator's life, but due to its obscurity, it's unlikely any copies would have survived to this day. The death of Brandon Lee. During the filming of his first and final lead role, Brandon Lee was tragically shot and killed during the accidental misfiring of a gun loaded with blank cartridges. The incident was caught on camera, though the director claimed to have insisted it was destroyed. Several cameramen from the production have gone on to state that copies of the incident still do exist, though no tangible proof of this have ever reached the public. Goodbye, Innocence. La Rosa de Guadalupe is a Mexican television program centered around promoting Catholicism. Many of the episodes are based upon real incidents, retold with religious imagery. The most controversial of these was an episode centered around a series of gang rapes that occurred in July of 2012. During the incident, a religious group of approximately 90 people were attacked by armed gang members while camping in El Colibri. Among the assaults and theft, 12 underage girls were molested. Only 1 month later, an episode based upon the incident was produced, titled Goodbye Innocence. Parents and victims of the attack protested its premiere, successfully convincing the channel to drop the episode. That is until they wound up airing it anyways a year later. After the second backlash, they have since never rebroadcast it, with no copies of the episode surfacing online aside from a handful of stills. Super Hornio Bros. Super Hornio Bros is a pornographic parody of the Super Mario Bros. Series from 1993, starring Ron Jeremy as Super Hornio. Shortly after its release, the film's distribution rights were bought by Nintendo themselves. As a result, its existence was buried, only being known as an urban legend until it was recounted on the Something Awful forums. It seems that the film did get a small limited release before being purchased by Nintendo, so it's very possible they could still surface online somehow. So far though, only its sequel has been found. Cannibal Holocaust deleted scenes. With the 1980 film Cannibal Holocaust already being infamous for its disturbing imagery, it's no surprise that any scene cut from it would share a similar effect. This was the case with the lost piranha scene, in which a warrior of the Yanomamo tribe is lowered into piranha-infested waters to have his leg amputated. Filming for the scene was never completed, due to the piranhas being difficult to control, though stills confirm that some takes do exist. The whereabouts of these scenes are unknown. Ricardo Lopez's video diary. Ricardo Lopez, also known as the Bjork Stalker, is a man who filmed the last weeks of his life leading up to his eventual suicide. The tapes center around his plot to create an acid bomb to disfigure a pop star, angered that she begun dating someone he disapproved of. With over 20 hours of footage, captured on tape included his manufacturing of the bomb, as well as his suicide. The tapes were discovered by authorities after Lopez's body was reported, causing the bomb to be intercepted and the singer thankfully unharmed. For years, the full video diary was only available in the form of an abridged 70-minute documentary, though the full tapes are easily accessible online. Original Jeff the Killer image. The infamous story of Jeff the Killer is one of the most well-known creepypastas of all time. However, its accompanying image remains a mystery. No one is certain where the original unedited photo is or what it looks like. It was believed to have been a photo of a girl named Katie Robinson, who posted an image of herself on 4chan sometime in early 2008. However, no evidence of this woman's existence can be found online, and the Jeff the Killer image can be seen even before 2008. As of now, the most widely accepted theory is that the original image is of a cam girl from Stickcam, but no one can find it. The Beatles, Carnival of Light. Carnival of Light is an unreleased Beatles song, known for being pretty long, at 14 minutes, and pretty experimental or avant-garde. The song was produced for a 2-day festival known as the Million Volt Light and Sound Race. Other than those 2 days, the track has never been played to the public. Paul McCartney has stated that he still has the song in his possession, and that he wants to release it, but that would require the approval of the other members or their estates. Camera Heads. Camera Heads is a lost creepypasta that was posted on 4chan in 2008, supposedly predating other popular creepypastas like Jeff the Killer or Slenderman. The story is about a man who discovers a backpack with a broken camera, a videotape, and a note that says, "I killed a camera head inside." He begins to research what the camera heads are before being stalked by one himself. It had your early creepypastas and ARG cliches, and a few online screenshots confirms its existence. Sadly, it's still lost, but a video has resurfaced in recent times. Chikara to Ona no Yo-Yo Naka. I probably mispronounced that horribly. This film is said to be the first Japanese anime to feature voice actors.
I'm just gonna pause it because I'm actively listening to it. For 2D animation, it's weird to explain. So because you're working in a 3D space, something I've come into is problems like this. But I think that's because I keep fucking with the origin of the object. If you don't work with anything in the 3D space, you can do it just fine. It's got some neat features like the sculpt tool is really fun for making shit like smears, stuff like that. Probably the sculpt tool is like the biggest big thing Blender has going for it. And then also having physical layering on top of things, because then you can get stuff like I think it shows in the camera here that as the camera moves, this moves ever so slightly because it's in front of him. So it's pretty fun, but it's it takes quite a bit of getting used to.
It was released in 1933 by Kenzo Masaoka and features a man who cheated on his abusive wife. Despite the film's significance, no prints are said to be available, and it is a lost film. Dingo Pictures. Dingo Pictures is a notoriously bad animation company, known for ripping off other studios like Disney and Pixar. Their films were really low budget and made for a quick buck honestly, but they have gained somewhat of a cult following nowadays. Surprisingly, most of their films are found, with the only exception being Sing Meets Aladdin, but even that one is only partially lost. Batman Fights Dracula. Considered one of the most sought after Asian films of all time, Batman Fights Dracula is noteworthy for having very little known about it, besides the standard stuff like the crew and cast. It was released in 1967, and features a mad scientist, who, after being thwarted by the Cape Crusader time and time again, decides to resurrect Dracula to fight Batman for revenge. Super Smash Bros. Slamfest 99. Back in 1999, Nintendo held an event called Slamfest 99, which showcased Mario, Yoshi, Pikachu, and Donkey Kong battling in a boxing ring. Although many photos were salvaged thanks to the Wayback Machine, no footage of the event currently exists. Banjo 3. At the end of Banjo-Tooie, Gruntilda hints at a sequel game known as Banjo-3. It is believed that this game would have been for the GameCube, Xbox, and Xbox 360. And a tech demo of Space Roll 2000 called Banjo-3 exists. Sadly, the game never went far into development, and was scrapped and replaced with Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. Aaron Ralston's video diary. On April 26, 2003, Aaron Ralston, a mountaineer, was climbing down Blue Jaw Canyon in Utah. During this event, the boulder that he was using to support his weight dislodged and crushed his wrist against the canyon wall. For the next couple of days, he would record a series of videos for his friends and family, under the assumption that he was going to die. Fortunately, he survived, but only after going to extreme lengths to survive, such as amputating his own arm. His story was the inspiration for the film 127 Hours, and his video diary is mostly lost. Aaron has stated that he would like the videos to remain private, as they were made for his loved ones, and he wants to keep it that way. Despite this, a few snippets have made their way online. TATU Paragate. TATU is a Russian pop duo from the late 90s and early 2000s, and this would have been an animated film starring the two singers. Very few promo images were ever released, and the film was eventually scrapped after the duo broke their contract with their manager, stating that he was too focused on creating scandals and fetishizing them. Unfortunately, he apparently had a lot to do with the movie, and it's unlikely it'll ever be produced now. Chris Farley's Shrek audio. I think most people know about this now, but Chris Farley, famed comedian from SNL, was supposed to be the original voice of Shrek. Unfortunately, he passed away from a drug overdose while he was still working on the film. It's said that 80 to 90% of Shrek's audio was recorded by Farley, and although the producers considered hiring a voice impersonator to finish the film, it was ultimately decided to pass the role to Mike Myers, fellow SNL member. Very little of Farley's take on the character was released, giving fans a small peek into an early version of their favorite Green Ogre. However, it's very unlikely that the rest will be released. Kingdom of the Sun. This was a very early version of what would become the Emperor's New Groove, before being drastically redesigned. Besides a few characters, everything else was pretty different, and even the plot was a bit darker. You can read about it online, it's kind of a lot, and it's an interesting little Disney rabbit hole. But given that the Emperor's New Groove does exist, it's highly unlikely that this version will ever be made. Previous versions of Minecraft. There are quite a few early beta versions of Minecraft that were made before the game really became popular. Unfortunately, many of these are lost due to time, and just the game naturally progressing and updating, but you can find some extremely early versions of the game on the Lost Media Wiki. GTA 3 for the Game Boy Advance. A version of Grand Theft Auto 3 was supposed to be made for the Game Boy Advance, developed by Crawfish Studios. However, the company was unfortunately shut down, and a lot of the staff were laid off, causing the game to be unfinished and eventually lost. Pokemon Crystal DLC. Pokemon Crystal had some downloadable content that was only accessible using the Mobile Adapter GB, an accessory for the Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance. It was only ever released in Japan, though the data for this still exists in international versions. Some of the DLC included items such as the GS Ball and Mirage Mail, as well as some minigames. Dumbo 2. A sequel for Disney's hit film, Dumbo, was planned to be released, but it never came to fruition for whatever reason. Only some storyboards and a vague plot description exists. The film would have featured the main cast getting lost in New York, and Dumbo's father would have made an appearance. Sonic DS. At E3 2004, Sega unveiled a tech demo called Sonic DS. The demo showed Sonic running through a level, with the player being able to control Sonic's speed with the DS stylus. It's unknown if this was meant to be developed into a full game, as nothing ever really came out of it. Chicken Little 2. A sequel was planned for the Disney film Chicken Little, but never made it that far into development. The plot involved Chicken Little finding himself in a love triangle between the ugly duckling Abby and a new character named Rafaela. The film was never made, possibly due to Chicken Little receiving mixed reviews, and only storyboards currently exist. Betty Boop and Popeye's sex tape. Recounted in an article by animation historian Jim Hill, the story goes that Max Fleischer, the creator of both characters, surprised animators at a celebration party for their new studio with an animation. This animation was a fully animated short of Betty Boop and Popeye having sex, complete with backgrounds, voice actors, a musical score, and stylized Florida landscaping. It was then said to have been locked away forever in a vault. To this day, no evidence of the short's existence has surfaced. Superman 1933. Though many cite Superman's debut as being his 1938 appearance in the first issue in Action Comics, he had actually appeared in two separate short stories prior. The first was a comic titled The Reign of Superman, in which the character debuted as a villain. In 1933, however, the creators began first toying with the idea of making him a hero. However, shortly after completing the comic, they were dropped by their publishing company. Unable to catch the eye of other publications, in a fit of rage, the comic was burned out of shame, with only the cover surviving. It's unknown if any copies of the full issue exist today. Many comic historians have tried to secure copies of the short story, but to no success. A Death in the Family, alternate version. In 1988, DC Comics infamously published a series of comics in which the Joker successfully kills Jason Todd, Batman's second Robin. At the end of an issue in the series A Death in the Family, a call line was included for fans to vote on whether or not Robin should survive. This implies that some alternate issue may have existed, and the off chance fans voted for Robin to live. Evidence of the alternate Jason Lives issue does exist, with one page having been completed and the other sketched. Roro-chan, 1999. On November 24th, 2013, a 14-year-old Japanese live streamer named Roro-chan, 1999, committed suicide after jumping off her 13th floor apartment balcony. It was said to have been instigated by chat, telling her she would fulfill her dreams of becoming a legend if she did so. The entire incident was streamed and archived, though it was briefly lost, until revitalized interest led to the footage being re-uploaded. The Shining deleted scenes. Considered by some as one of the greatest films of all time, it's no surprise the film has deleted scenes. Unlike most deleted scenes, however, one of them actually made it to the premiere. At the end of the film, there was originally an epilogue in which Danny and Wendy are recovering from the assault. After premiering in Los Angeles and New York, Kubrick ordered for the scenes to be cut. Apart from the script and a handful of Polaroid photos, the scene remains lost to the public. The Mask 2. Given that The Mask was a box office success, spawning several tie-in series, comic books, and other spin-offs, it's unsurprising that talks of a sequel began, even being advertised in a contest in Nintendo Power. The Mask 2 was on track to being greenlit until Jim Carrey turned the role down. Even after being offered $10 million, he noted that he disliked playing the same character twice. This led to whatever was completed for the sequel to be scrapped. PlayStation All-Stars DLC. PlayStation All-Stars is essentially the Super Smash Bros. Equivalent for the PlayStation. Unfortunately, all DLC, or downloadable content, characters for the game were cancelled mid-production during 2013, including several highly requested characters, including Dart from The Legend of Dragoon. Despite social media campaigns for the material to be released, none of the characters saw the light of day, with most never even being officially announced. Heartbeat in the Brain. In 1978, a documentary known as Heartbeat in the Brain screened at the Sudam Gallery in New York. The film, directed by Amanda Felding, showed Felding herself drilling a hole in her head using a dentist's drill. Supposedly, at least one audience member fainted while watching it. Although the film was screened again in 2011, it has never surfaced online, aside from a few clips. The lost Apollo 11 footage. The Apollo 11 landing, in which astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin stepped foot on the moon, has become known as one of the most monumental moments in human history. However, although the footage of the actual touchdown has been preserved, the full original SSTV tapes of the event have mysteriously been lost by NASA. This was due to an apparent issue converting signals from the cameras, as they were incompatible with broadcasting standards. As a result, it seems that the uncut footage has genuinely been lost forever, with NASA themselves speculating that they were likely wiped for reuse shortly after the broadcast, and are thus unrecoverable. Rugrats Storyboard Jam. During downtime on the production of Rugrats, Storyboard artists at Nickelodeon began venting their frustrations by collaborating on a grotesque, darkly humored comic featuring the show's characters. This included references to incest, molestation, and murder. The storyboard jam was eventually confiscated by an executive producer, who was, quote, disturbed. It's unknown if the comic was destroyed or simply locked away, though one page has resurfaced online from a participant. Dracula, 1931. In original screenings of 1931's Dracula, an epilogue by Edward Van Sloan was included, of the actor directly speaking to the audience. The epilogue was eventually cut when it was reissued in 1936 to avoid controversy from religious groups. Though some footage and audio have surfaced throughout various behind-the-scenes documentaries, the full epilogue has escaped release. The Land Before Time uncensored version. Don Bluth's The Land Before Time was heavily censored before release, with many of these scenes cut without the director's wishes. 13 minutes of complete animation in total were cut from the film, largely to secure the film's PG rating. This included several extended chase and fight scenes, as well as an entirely alternate ending for the film. The footage and production materials exist, though they're unable to be released without the express permission of a rights holder. El Hombre Lobo. I think the iceberg image is referring to Knights of the Werewolf, a supposed 1968 horror film. It was said to have been filmed in Paris before the director died in a car crash the week after its completion. The issue is that this supposed director may not have existed. No record for the name René Govar has been found, and all details relating to Knights of the Werewolf originate from one man, named Paul Naschy. It's speculated he may have invented the film to boost his early resume. However, one supposed still has surfaced, though it's possible Naschy could have faked it to boost his credibility. South Park, episode 200 and 201, uncensored. In South Park's controversial 200th and 201st episodes, they tackled the issue of broadcast censorship head-on, alluding to the Prophet Muhammad after facing previous backlash for depicting him. The episodes were heavily censored before airing, and have been denied re-release on streaming services. One of these included an ending monologue regarding the effectiveness of violence, which in the TV broadcast was entirely censored. Originally thought to be a meta joke, the original audio was leaked after a hacker downloaded the original file from the servers of South Park's website. Conker's Bad Fur Day, the alternate version. Rare's Conker's Bad Fur Day, released in 1999, was notorious at the time for how raunchy and offensive its humor was. However, prior to 1999, the game was intended to be another family-friendly
Forehead. Oh man, that's great. I can't. I hate looking at this. Give me. My fucking god.
IP, known as 12 Tales, Conquer 64. After receiving criticism for making another kid-friendly 3D platformer, the game was redesigned for a mature audience. A prototype build of the original game has since surfaced, showcasing what the game was like before development shifted gears. Mean Girls DS. Developed by 505 Games, Mean Girls was a tie-in game for the 2004 comedy film of the same name. Intended for the Nintendo DS, it was scheduled for release in 2010, though for unknown reasons, never saw the light of day. The game was described in reviews as a Puzzle Quest ripoff, though the ESRB stated it was a text-based adventure game. Neither of these descriptions match Surface screenshots, however, which instead illustrate it as a simple series of minigames. Though the studio is aware of interest in the game, they've been unable to provide further information for a variety of copyright reasons, and consequently the game has yet to resurface. Osama bin Laden's body photos. Upon the raid that led to Osama bin Laden's death, a series of photos documenting his body's condition were taken in Afghanistan before it was thrown into the ocean. Because the body itself was thrown into the ocean to prevent martyrdom, it's perhaps unsurprising the photos of his corpse have remained unpublished as well. Though some photos purport to be from the incidents, these have all been debunked as fake. SpongeBob Invader Pants Krabs' Army. During the 9th season of SpongeBob SquarePants, an episode with the segments SpongeBob Invader Pants and Krabs' Army canceled during production. It's unknown what these episodes entailed, though they apparently never made it past storyboards. An image has surfaced of the storyboards for SpongeBob Invader Pants, though they are largely unlegible. Life Sucks. Life Sucks is the title of the intended 7th episode of Ren and Stimpy's adult party cartoon. Considered by those who worked on the episode as the best Ren and Stimpy episode ever, it's centered around pessimistic and nihilistic philosophy. The episode had been storyboarded, though due to low ratings the entire show was cancelled, prematurely ending production. The full synopsis remains unseen, with only a few early storyboards surfacing online. The death of Don Brancheau. In 2010, SeaWorld trainer Don Brancheau was tragically killed by the largest orca whale the zoo had. A perfectionist, she would always record her performances to help herself figure out how to improve. As a result, her graphic death was captured on camera, including when the whale refused to let go of her mutilated limbs. The incident was documented in the film Blackfish, which actually shows footage, however it cuts right before her death. Pseudo Scorpion. Pseudo Scorpion is a supposed album created by an artist named Zenjin. It's described as an album made using fragments of child pornography audio. No other information on Zenjin can be found online, and due to its disgusting nature, it will likely remain lost. Him. Him is a 1974 gay pornographic film about a young gay man obsessed with Jesus Christ. According to what very little is written about the film online, the main character uses his obsession with Christ to understand the hidden meanings of the Gospels. The only remnants of this film are a few ads and reviews from newspapers, I mentioned in the book The Gold Turkey Awards, and a few online discussions here and there. One of the film's actors was revealed to be Gustav von Will, who played Jesus. Unfortunately, Gustav passed away in January 1991. His IMDb page contains no other works besides him. The Butcher. In 2019, a post was made onto r/tip of my tongue about a supposed film that aired.
It's a good. I gotta admit. I gotta admit, not looking forward to this. Why was that not secured? Yeah, that'll leave a divot in your forehead. Oh man.
Aired on Nickelodeon. The film was described as using real bones from animals, such as cats, dogs, and birds. Supposedly, the whole thing was in black and white, contained no dialogue, and used ambient music, which only added to the creepiness. In a follow-up post, the film would be the long-lost shorts, though this hasn't been confirmed. Go for a Punch. This is the name given to a supposed anime on the deep web. The anime was first brought to attention by a user on 4chan. According to this user, the anime was about girls who were stuck in a large bathroom. After a few days, they started to commit suicide in brutal ways. The quality was apparently 80ish and it was in subs. Though many people were interested in seeing this anime, there is no proof of its existence, and it's likely a hoax. The Rape of Wonder Woman. This was an unreleased comic book by Mark Millar, a writer who is known for being quite controversial. It was supposed to be in the same vein as The Death of Superman or Nightfall, with something tragic happening to our heroes.
That'll leave a divot in your forehead.
Though Mark claims it was just a joke, he supposedly mentioned that DC were considering it, but ultimately dropped the idea. There's very little information about it online, if it exists at all. Q source. According to Wikipedia, the Q source is a collection of hypothetical sayings from Jesus.
Oh man, that's great.
Apparently, out of the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Matthew and Luke have some overlapping writing that is not shared with the other Gospels. What's even more strange is that these overlaps are quotes from Jesus. The theory is that Matthew and Luke got these quotes from a different source, hence the Q source, which is of course lost. I'm not an expert in religious studies at all, so if anyone knows more about this, I'd love to read more in the comments. Medieval found footage. From what I could tell, this is basically just a conspiracy theory about time travel. The theory states that in the future, when time travel is possible, people will travel back to medieval times to capture the past. There is apparently videos, or at least one, on YouTube right now claiming to be from medieval times. And who knows if there's more out there. I guess they haven't happened yet? All lost media has always been on the internet. I guess this implies that pieces of lost media can exist online with no one knowing. Who's to say that him or the Apollo 11 tapes aren't already online but under a different name or something? We'd never know. Alrighty, and that is the lost media iceberg.
will never be yo, yo, yo. I don't wanna live in a bog. I don't wanna eat any bugs. I don't wanna drink that shit. That will never wag your chip. I don't wanna live in a bog. I don't wanna eat any bugs. I don't wanna drink that shit. That will never be yo, yo, yo.
Last night I had a dream. I was walking through a field of green. Now my fears disappeared and my debts wiped clean. I was living in the lap of luxury. But when I woke up I knew something was
Step Brothers Unite is a statement that will either make you giddy or dizzy. These Will Ferrell man-child movies have been a strange addiction of mine for a long time now. Be it Semi-Pro, The Land of the Lost, Daddy's Home, or The Campaign. I hate to watch these movies because I suppose on a basic level, I just want to understand them. How can one man be in so many movies, be one of the most prolific and highest paid comedic talents in Hollywood, and still do the exact same shtick in all of them?
I'm a brilliant genius. I'm not conceited, it's just the way I am. And I have such an amazing brain, and it's just a fact.
These movies are like skins in a video game, despite all having a different flair or gimmick. Fundamentally, it's always going to be the same base model. And I suppose in a way that's kind of been the appeal, with the caveat that every now and again there'd be one just funny enough to make you forget about the bad. Yet, over time, as the concepts ran thin and the repetition started to settle, the universe perfectly aligned with the worst possible set of circumstances to guarantee the creation of Holmes and Watson. I suppose the list of man-child roles for Will Ferrell to play was so spent that by 2017, the only reasonable choice was to delve into the public domain for inspiration. Sherlock Holmes is obviously highly recognizable, importantly including wide Hollywood appeal thanks to the Guy Ritchie movies and the Benedict Cumberbatch BBC miniseries. In the boardroom, this film must have looked like a slam dunk. You have the guy who helped write Madagascar 2 and classic Mike Judge comedies. You have Step Brothers Unite. You have the guy who did the Boom Block soundtrack. You have $42 million. You somehow have Ralph Fiennes and Kelly MacDonald. You also snagged Rob Brydon and Steve Coogan.
So best to avoid laughing. If you want to do that, I can recommend watching a film that John and I did called Holmes and Watson. You should be pretty safe with that.
Steve Coogan isn't even in the credits and they put him on the poster. After the disastrously successful Get Hard proved that director Ethan Coen, no, it's not that one, was capable of praying to Satan and summoning 111 million plus smackers of unholy capital, the world was Ethan's oyster. Now was his time to take his impressive background in comedy and prove himself on the cinematic stage. Tell the story he'd always wanted to tell.
You see, it's a type of a self-photograph. I can take it, and I will be in it also.
Purse your lips together like a duck.
From the word go, this entire project was an awful, awful idea. Floating around in development hell from as early as 2008, originally intended for Sacha Baron Cohen to lead as Sherlock and Will Ferrell to support as Watson, with Judd Apatow producing, as an obvious response to the success of Talladega Nights. That pitch never came to be. Instead, rather suddenly in 2016, when a scheduling slot opened and Sony realized they had a few extra million lying around that they needed to launder, yeah, they seized the moment, alright. Based on the sheer amount of behind-the-scenes featurettes and advertising available for this movie, it seems reasonable to assume that they didn't quite expect this to be as bad as it turned out.
Will is the best Holmes because he can get away with anything and still not seem like a bad guy. His superpower is that he can be these guys who might be a jerk coming from any other actor, but he makes them lovable because he's Will.
Or they did know and knowingly decided to torture the entire cast by giving them the impossible job of explaining the basic goals and intent of the story.
Yeah, we decided that the most famous characters in English literature needed an American revamp by Will and I, but we've still kept it English.
We still kept it English.
The context and intent is everything to me when talking about a movie, so it is maddening listening to the people involved in the project flounder and attempt to distract from how much of a disaster it turned out to be.
You know, everyone in the world is a fan of Will and John together. That's sort of a gimme. And then we could get to see them together physically. I feel like no matter what kind of comedy you like, there's something for you in this movie.
Each person appears to have a completely different idea for what the film is going for. Sometimes it's awkwardly relying on their stepbrothers and Talladega Nights' reputation.
Well, I saw the movie and it is very funny.
Everyone in the world is a fan of Will and John together.
Well, if you saw Step Brothers.
So it reminds you of something you've already seen, you've already loved, and that's really lovely.
To pass it off as the capper to the great man-child trilogy, but at the same time also communicating this idea that at its heart it's a tried and true Sherlock Holmes story that fans of the source material would enjoy.
It's not a spoof on previous Holmes and Watson movies. It's got its own brand of humor.
This is the best part. Now you take creamy buttocks.
We're playing the genre and the time period, you know, absolutely real.
Platypus face, chins up. Hey!
You really feel like you're in a serious genre movie, which is always what we wanted to achieve.
I could use a bit of cocaine.
Close enough to the target for real, Holmes and Watson fans to be satisfied and appreciative.
It's a period correct Victorian comedy, and then
At one point they even half attempted to pass it off as a Christmas movie.
Is this a Christmas movie?
oh sure, merry old England and all.
Right.
Yeah.
On
Tiny
Christmas
Tim.
Day.
In fact, the single best performance related to this project is the one Will Ferrell gives in the featurette where he has to try and pretend that there's some kind of genius wit behind the movie.
We get to comment on the current world, just various aspects that when you read the books you think,
Spiders like an apple, eh?
oh, that'd be funny if you could make fun of this. And that's the whole purpose of this movie.
If you want to drive a man insane, just loop clips from these interviews. They're trying so hard, but not even Daniel Day-Lewis could act his way out of this situation. The desperation absolutely oozes from this movie, and it makes me squirm to think about.
And this movie reminds me more of like Mel Brooks comedies.
We can do funny things. We can do
oddly enough, never trying to be funny.
We can have a version that we know will be okay for PG-13. We can have the version that might be too R-rated to be in the movie.
Eitan has allowed me to push this to an even crazier place than I would ever expect.
The characterization that she's come up with that's, essentially mime. I mean, what she's doing is inspired.
Where he's like, oh, you can go further than that, and I already think that I'm being so crazy and weird.
So we're really careful about making sure that we get all the different versions so that we don't shoot a scene that the MPA then says this can't be in the movie.
And within the context of the scene and the writing, trust that it will turn out funny.
And they are so good at playing misguided confidence.
Whoa! That's amazing.
I think that's one of the things that Will does really well, is a confident idiot.
So we're never going for jokes in a weird way.
Very important, yeah. About Sherlock Holmes.
Mm-hmm. It's a musical.
Now, because it's completely ridiculous, it works. So,
that's another reason why to do this movie.
Yeah. What's not to like?
Don't use that. God, we're really blowing it.
In saying that, though, it does hold a fair few accolades. It won the award for the worst poster ever conceived and broke new ground in its 6-time nomination at the Raspberry Awards, winning 4 of them. When you beat out Gotti and the Happy Time Murders, you know you fucked it. So it didn't make money, no one likes it. But is it really as bad as they say? The answer is yes, this is the worst Will Ferrell comedy. With half of the movie being an incredibly basic Sherlock Holmes murder mystery, and the other half being the stepbrothers ad-libbing and eating onions and just being man-children. You're left with this bizarre juxtaposition that makes every scene feel like a disjointed Funny or Die skit.
Hello, Inspector Strong.
That plays in a loosely connected sequence with an expensive Sherlock Holmes skin over it. There's a lot of talk about the unique way this pair acts out their scenes with a lot of on-the-spot ad-libbing.
They improvise a lot, which is really fun to watch.
Or Will and I will think of some stuff on our feet as we're going along. We become inspired by whatever we're doing, and
it's a very relaxed atmosphere on set as well, which is helpful. Eitan's just lovely and just lets you kind of play.
Oh, silly question.
Ad-libbing.
Ad-libbing.
So you're in the
Yeah,
scenes,
right.
it's all on the page, and you start to go.
This is a very imprecise science you're describing. And that's the way we worked on Step Brothers, that's the way we worked on Talladega Nights, and it's really just Will and I just trying to survive out there on camera. Follow, a train of thought a certain way. Step Brothers and Talladega Nights, we had all kinds of room to kind of like just go nuts but on this one, there were certain marks we had to hit. I was going to say certain marks we had to miss.
Their chemistry and talent as performers in the right circumstance can lead to some fairly funny comedy. The problem comes in when you have a directionless story with horrendous timing and complete lack of urgency. You can have all the money and talent you want, but if you do not have a solid vision for an idea as wacky as this, there's effectively no way to make it work. Absurd comedy is a treat when it's consistent with whatever story it is they're trying to tell. However, anyone would tell you that you cannot simultaneously be an off-the-wall absurdist comedy and a serious Sherlock Holmes murder mystery at the same time. They have a couple basic jokes that form the backbone of all the humor present in the movie. One of the major examples being that it's funny that people from the 1800s would not do or say things that someone in 2018 would, like fake news,
That's fake news.
or even board game jokes.
Damn it, you sunk my battleship.
They very much enjoy a dash of raunch, but because this has to be a PG-13, it's mostly limited to the language that they use.
A sniff of morning cocaine always helps the brain.
Will Ferrell has long relied on his flowery vocabulary combined with his quick wit in order to shoot out wacky statements that catch you off guard. This can be funny when reeled back or controlled, or framed within a character that is memorable or likable in some way. But here the ad-libbing is so obnoxious and lacking in any structure or subtlety that it makes scenes drag and feel completely disconnected. I cannot believe I'm saying this because I can't stand Step Brothers, but at least in that movie the style of humor is consistent with itself. It is quite literally the man-child movie, and if you find that concept funny, then I suppose it is succeeding at its job. However, deciding to, surprise surprise, make Sherlock Holmes into a man-child is so at odds with the intent of the character. There's nothing funny about this framing. Will Ferrell as Sherlock Holmes is not a genius move.
Sailing under an alien.
The problem they found themselves with is that Sherlock Holmes is already so extreme and quirky in his behaviors as a character that they're almost trying to caricature a caricature. The original dynamic of Holmes and Watson works because one is the straight man and the other is a socially inept genius. Both of them being stupid man-children is not an inherently interesting dynamic, and a huge portion of the inherent situational comedy is left at the door. The lack of creativity manifests with gags on the level as this.
Spanish like an apple, eh?
The joke is Sherlock eating a raw onion because it will help him produce red blood cells.
It can increase your red blood cells.
Then Holmes and Watson proceed to eat a raw onion, like over-the-top man-children who are playing it up for the camera. It feels more like they placed a pile of onions in front of Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly and went, "Go on then. Be funny," instead of writing an actual parody of a Sherlock Holmes story that mocks the tropes and beats you'd expect. At points, it almost feels like it's going for something similar to Horrible Histories, which is an educational British show based on a series of books, where a group of comedians use absurd facts from the past as a means to teach kids about history. The difference, though, is that it's a small-scale TV show designed and marketed for children. Indeed, it is funny that what are now considered hard drugs in modern times were freely available for the public to consume, but that observation alone is not enough to inspire an entire movie's worth of jokes. An hour in and you get a scene where the Step Brothers take coke and start screaming and throwing a ball around.
I could use a bit of cocaine.
That's the joke. You could take this entire scene out and nothing would change. The same could be said about the running gag with Queen Victoria, where John C. Reilly thinks she's very attractive. Because you see, the joke is that Queen Victoria is known for being ugly. Maybe in the writer's room these ideas seem funny as disparate throwaway jokes, but the way it comes together in the movie is unbearable.
And thank you for your many years. Your many.
There's a 5-hour-long sequence where the stepbrothers appear to accidentally kill the queen, so they try to move her corpse in a box to hide the evidence, but she won't fit. Then she wakes up and the movie continues with something else. It means nothing and has no point aside from a failed gag. If the actual story of the movie was the stepbrothers trying to cover up the accidental murder of the queen, at least that's a silly comedic idea that could be a funny story. The reliance on random minion humor is shocking considering the release date.
Balloons are happy, but they're not alive.
You could probably convince someone that this movie was in fact made in 2008, if not for the tired presidential commentary that isn't as clever as it thinks it is.
We gave you your freedom, and now look what you've done with it.
Another outdated decision were the multiple jokes designed around directly parodying the Guy Ritchie Sherlock Holmes movies and the BBC show. The most obvious jokes you would think of when watching those movies are all in here. It's a recycled, tired punchline thrown out when Sherlock uses his brilliance to perfectly figure out how to swing a cricket bat to squash a mosquito. And later on they parody the fight scene from the 2009 movie, where the joke is that he's actually an idiot so his quick thinking doesn't work. God, that's brilliant. And if all of that wasn't enough, the technical shoddiness is a sight to behold. Multiple shots are out of focus, or the focus point is in a confusing or nonsensical position, and that's the lowest bar to me. Is the subject in focus? This is clearly not a stylistic or intentional decision, and indicates the quality level they were happy to settle for. Another embarrassing technical feature is the ADR and general coverage of dialogue. There are far too many noticeable moments where the audio doesn't match the performance.
Last brand of ink, which means you went into his desk. The dust on your boots is freshly dried clay.
I never even heard anyone knocking.
You find my mate. Me?
The hand of his loyal partner, Dr. Watson.
You're staying, Dr. Watson, but I'll be on my way to America.
I suppose this is a question of if this comes from laziness or ineptitude, and I'm inclined to think the former. The director of photography is not inexperienced by any means, so how else could the end result be this shoddy if not for a complete lack of creative investment? Besides, how is anyone supposed to plan out a great scene when so much of the humor comes from random improv from the lead actors? They designed the movie to be bad and didn't even realize it until it was far too late. So many scenes wind up with 2 to 4 characters awkwardly standing around with lackluster energy and clear lack of direction. It's like nails on a chalkboard.
Yes, I'm quite fine, my lover John Watson.
I find it twice as frustrating that they had 2 British actors in the movie who I guarantee would have been a better Holmes and Watson, but they weren't in Step Brothers or Borat, so I guess the best casting in the entire project can stay as background uncredited scenery. Whatever. For what is supposed to be a comedy, I am dumbfounded by how easy it is to not laugh a single time. It is genuinely effortlessly humorless, and not in a way that makes it entertaining. This is not an enjoyably bad movie by any means. In fact, in many ways, this is an example of the absolute worst possible outcome for a big-budget Hollywood production. I will always find a failure of this magnitude, especially considering the talent and influence involved, to be much worse than any small-scale independent production ever could. It represents the inverse of everything that is good about cinema. It saps creativity. It makes the concept of comedy a distant pastime. I will say that John C. Reilly's performance is not nearly as bad as Will Ferrell's.
Prepare yourself to be astonished.
You can tell he's overall a better performer and takes every role seriously, even if it's in something as bad as this. But as a British person, hearing them attempt an English accent adds yet another layer of misery to the experience.
What?
I think it's great that the cast and press had a great laugh making this movie.
I gotta go. So we just
Must be a dream come true to be so famous that you can breeze through a project as bad as this, get paid hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, and laugh about how little thought was put into the premise of the movie.
This was new territory for me. I was like, let's do something fresh.
Yeah.
And I knew the kids are gonna love.
Yeah.
Right?
Here we are. Yeah.
I'm gonna stop trying to make actual points about the movie and just go with the convo, I think.
So where does this movie belong in my ranking? Personally, this is not even close to being the worst comedy I've talked about in this series, despite it probably being the worst film I've ever seen with Will Ferrell as the lead. Not Cool, F the Prom and Disaster Movie are all significantly worse, which leads me to ranking it as the 55th worst. If this movie inspires me to do anything, it's to formally apologize to Sherlock Gnomes. Comparatively, that movie is miles better in terms of adapting a Sherlock story. That's just how low the bar is now. Thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to check out the Trying to Watch for this movie, which should be up soon unless it gets taken down instantly, I don't know. Or even check out the entire Search for the Worst playlist for more videos.
I like the way that these mechanics give a wee bit of extra utility to certain items and abilities. But nevertheless, there's a grind associated with natures, a lot of resetting and restarting, which is the antithesis of fun. It's a lot of effort to circumvent this one random chance. If natures didn't exist, there would be less tedium in the game. Or, to put it another way, if natures didn't exist, then I wouldn't be out here looking for another bloody Skarmory. To be clear, I'm not saying that they need to get rid of natures, just that natures have problems. It was during my search for Skarmory that I got what's known as a critical capture. When you throw a Pokeball, you have a minuscule chance of it getting what is effectively a critical hit. It only shakes once, so you have a much higher chance of catching the Pokemon. The more complete your Pokédex is, the higher a chance you have of getting one of these. Apparently I have a 0.5% chance of getting one where I am now, which is 1 in 200 balls, so that's pretty rare. I got pretty lucky. Of course, Skarmory still escaped, so it was pretty anticlimactic. I don't mind critical captures, but I don't think that I would miss them if they were gone. They happen so rarely that I often forget they exist. I could have used an Ultra Ball to make life easier on myself, but, and I feel a bit embarrassed admitting this, but honestly, I want my team to be consistent. Your Pokemon retain the markings of the ball they were caught in, which is great attention to detail, but it looks inconsistent if you've got 5 red balls and 1 black and yellow one. I know that sounds petty, but I don't mean it as a criticism, it's just the way I like to play. The Pokeball is another one of those evergreen designs that I will forever associate with Pokemon. It's pretty impressive for what is basically a circle with a line through it. Did you know that the Pokeball was actually based on Warhol's Campbell soup cans? Anyway, I finally caught a Skarmory with an acceptable nature. It's gentle, which lowers its defense but raises special defense, as you can see from the red and blue colours on those stats. The game never actually explains that association, by the way. It never tells you why one stat is red and one's blue. I could have held out for a better nature, but I don't care that much, it's good enough. I've called Skarmory Scraps, which is probably the most vanilla name I'm going to have. It seems to be based on vultures, which are known for eating carrion, it fits with its species name, and it put up a bit of a scrap getting into that ball, so there you go, that's the reason. Moving on to Route 114, I'm going to teach Skarmory some TMs, as its moveset is pretty lackluster. TMs are an impressive feat. Deciding what each Pokemon can and cannot learn based on context would be a lot of work, I think. There are some oversights. Nuzleaf, for example, doesn't learn Night Slash, which seems weird to me, but it would be impossible to account for every person's train of logic. I don't know what TMs are supposed to be though. Are they instructional DVDs, or do you just load them into the computer when your Pokemon's in?
Secured.
TMs are multi-use nowadays, which is one of the best decisions the series has made. Previously, TMs were a one-use item, but teaching a move only once led to a lot of trepidation. If you ever changed your mind, then the TM would be...
Oh man, that's great. I can't... I hate looking...
wasted. But now you can experiment with movesets a lot more easily. I would normally be the first to protest that inconveniences lead to decision making, but I think that the ability to experiment so easily to find out what works silences any qualms I might have had. It's a lot less stressful to customise Skarmory's moveset exactly how I want, because I don't need to worry about needing a particular move later on. You can find Lynette's cottage here, Lynette being a cookie cutter replacement for Bill from Generation 1. She created the game's box system where Pokemon are stored when they're not in your party. The box system is functional but unremarkable. There are plenty of ways to organise your Pokemon how you see fit, which is obviously great, but not much to say about it really. The box system is one of those things that I'm used to, but is still weird when I stop and think about it. How do you upload a Pokemon to the PC? It seems like a really strange justification. It's not a problem at all, it's just funny to think that this is the justification that Game Freak came up with for Pokemon that weren't in your party. You save them in the computer. Brilliant. My problem with the system is that the deposit and withdraw menus are both completely pointless. You can do both much more easily from the organise menu. That might seem like small potatoes, and it is, but what confuses me is that Lynette gives you the option to put organise at the top of the menu. She even describes this as being a better way to organise your Pokemon. So Game Freak clearly acknowledged that deposit and withdraw are pointless, and yet rather than simply remove the options, their solution was to allow you to put the more useful option above them about a quarter of the way into the game. It's bonkers. Some Pokemon, like Skarmory, Zangoose and Seviper, don't evolve. This isn't for balancing or mechanical purposes, I don't think, but it seems to be a byproduct of the fact that the team can't think of compelling evolutions for every single Pokemon. That's not a problem though. I wouldn't want to stymie their creativity by forcing them to balance something so inconsequential. The reason for this is amusingly pithy. Researchers in the Pokemon world don't understand why this happens either. I mean, there can't be a scientific explanation for it if scientists don't understand it themselves. Zangoose is a Pokemon that's exclusive to Omega Ruby. In Alpha Sapphire you find Seviper here instead. There are many such minor differences throughout the games, and honestly I feel like it's a bit of an archaic design choice. First of all, there are a tiny amount of version exclusive Pokemon. Omega Ruby has Seed
I want to show you this super quick and easy water material texture tutorial for Blender, because within Eevee you can do it so quick and easy now. So delete your default cube, create a plane, multiply it by 5, don't know why. Just multiply it by 5. Go into the material default cube, create a plane, multiply it by 5, don't know why, just multiply it by 5. Go into the material default for Blender, because within Eevee by 5, don't know why, just multiply it by 5. Go into the material preview and add a new material. Principled BSDF should be added by default. Now let's call it something crazy like water. Yeah, water, that'll do. And what we're going to do is add a new texture, Musgrave texture, vector, bump, connect the height to the height. And the normal to the normal. Normal. If you've got a Node Wrangler add-on enabled, press Ctrl T. And there we go. Our material, wait, no. Okay, we're not done yet. So what you need to do now is just play around with the scale. And this is what's going to change it from being either an ocean viewed from far away or a sort of close-up view on a little pool. So just the scale viewed from, just play around with the scale. And this is what's going to change it from being either an ocean viewed from far away or a sort of close-up view on a little pool. So adjust the scale first. I'm going to play around with the lunaricity, and that's going to change the sort of scaling of the texture that we've got here. Put the dimension to 0.8 or something, increase the metallic up towards 1, change the HDRI for no reason whatsoever, and here we go. Let's decrease the strength of the normal. And there we go. Now we're starting to get a oceanic looking material. Looking really nice, but it's a bit too golden. So let's go and change the color to something blue, because water is usually a blue color. Yeah, there we go. That's looking quite nice. And as a close up, that's looking quite good, but if we want to get an oceanic look from far away, change the dimension. The close up, that's looking quite good, but if we want to get an oceanic look from far away, change the dimension and change the lunaricity, you know what I mean. And there we go. Boom, we have an ocean looking texture without having to change the size of the actual plane itself. We're just playing around with the scale and the settings on this Musgrave texture. Now obviously an ocean is going to be a much darker color, so change that to be a much deeper blue, well, whatever color you want it to be. This is the thing, you can just change the base color and Bob's your uncle, have it to be whatever you want. But how do we animate this? How do we actually make it look like an ocean? Well, on the mapping node, right click on the Z, do insert key, actually make color, and Bob's your uncle. Have it to be whatever you want. But how do we animate this? How do we actually make it look like an ocean? Well, on the mapping node, right click on the Z, do insert keyframe, move along to however far along you want, and add another keyframe, move it along to like 1 meter or something. Add another keyframe, right click, make sure it's linear so that it's constantly moving, and there we go. We've got a nice looking puddleness, but we want it to actually move from left to right. So now turn your attention to the Y value, add a keyframe there, and then wow, and there we go. 3 frames all aligned properly, and then you can go ahead, as I say, change the color, change the settings. There's no extra geometry or anything like that. We found this helpful. Play around. So after
Dot, Mawile, Zangoose, Solrock, and Groudon. Alpha Sapphire instead gets Lotad, Sableye, Seviper, Lunatone, and Kyogre. Once you get the national Pokédex, only 10 more Pokémon are added onto that number in each game. I think that having an entirely separate game for the sake of a change in 15 Pokémon out of 721 is kind of wasteful. Secondly, it's very easy to trade Pokemon with the inclusion of Wi-Fi. Before, trading was worthwhile because it was a social experience involving a lot of coordination with your friends. The 2-version system justified itself because it was a lot of fun getting together and organising worthwhile trades. But with breeding and Wi-Fi, you'll usually find a surplus of the Pokemon that you want, unless of course it's a legendary. So it's a lot more impersonal now. Don't get me wrong, it's great that it never feels like they're withholding content to force you to buy 2 versions. You can always get the complete Pokemon experience by buying just one. But that means that, on the other hand, the changes between the two are so negligible that making 2 separate games for it feels a bit redundant. Meteor Falls and the surrounding area really benefited from the remake. Sometimes the routes can be a wee bit indistinct visually, but the craters and metallic yellow soil really separate this place from just being another cave. Team Magma is trying to get their hands on Professor Cosmo's meteorite. May is casually throwing around the kind of language that could destroy a man, like bozo. Next time you're locked in an altercation with a criminal mastermind, call them a bozo. I guarantee that'll work out for you. May joins forces with us to take down Magma admin Tabitha, who has a girl's name despite being male. If this was a translation error, that's fair enough, but I don't know why it was retained in the remake. Fighting alongside an NPC is a cumbersome affair that the game repeats a couple of times. You're unable to direct them at all, meaning that synergy is really limited. For example, if you have a Pokemon that knows Earthquake, there's no way to communicate to your partner that they need to switch to a flying type. But in its defense, this is here more for narrative reasons than mechanical ones. Trying to endear me to May by having her take action alongside me seems like a good approach. Either way, she comes out of it looking better than her opponents, who use self-destruct in a Skarmory. I can't comment on the quality of the programming or anything, but the AI is really moronic at times. Team Aqua, the villains of Alpha Sapphire, show up afterwards. They don't ever become allies or even major characters, but they are trying to stop Team Magma as well. It seems like a weird coincidence having 2 evil teams with such consistent theming, and I didn't expect them to actually address that, but apparently Archie and Maxie used to work together on a team beforehand, so there you go. Tabitha here is about to take the meteorite, and watch what they do with the models to represent this action. Characters will bounce and back up and spin around to signify actions, which is almost certainly a cost-cutting measure. Obviously, in an ideal world, it would be fully animated, but that's probably going to be impossible in a lot of cases because of time or memory constraints. This solution is, well, it's alright, but it makes the game feel like it's made by a kid who's playing out the scenes with action figures, and I'm not sure if that was intentional, nor if it was the best fit. As if to illustrate my point, Tabitha has to announce that he's holding the meteorite because they have no way of actually showing that. Afterwards, May teleports you and Professor Cosmo straight back to Fall Arbor, and then she offers to take you straight to Moville. As before, this hand-holding completely undermines the level design. To get back to Moville, you could easily continue through Meteor Falls, explore Route 115, and then head through Rusturf Tunnel. If you hadn't gone west at Moville earlier, then Verdanturf and Route 117 would be new to you as well. The map is deliberately designed so that you have a smooth path back to where you need to be, and what's more, it's a path that unlocks a lot of new content. It genuinely annoys me a wee bit that the game doesn't let its level design do the work here, because this is supposed to be an adventure across Hoenn. It might not be the most exciting bit of your journey, but having to walk back to Moville creates the sense of this being a consistent world. Rather than see it on a map, you get to experience how Hoenn all fits together, which I think is a valuable part of the experience. But instead, May just drags you further away from Moville than you were in Meteor Falls, and then she offers to warp you to Moville anyway. So the warp is offered to fix a problem that was created by forcing you to warp back to Fall Arbor in the first place. Regardless of how you get back to Moville, it's straight back up to Mount Chimney again, where Team Magma have finally shifted their arses so you can use the cable car. At the summit, Magma and Aqua are having their climactic showdown. This might have been a cool scene, but everybody's still using their bloody Puccinas. I don't know what's going on under the bonnet here, maybe there was a technical reason that they couldn't do more, but this looks a lot goofier than it should. Imagine this mad wee pug mosh pit. You need to fight Tabitha and then Maxie in quick succession. I don't really mind fighting Tabitha again so soon, but that's just because he's not much more than a regular grunt. You know, just so long as he doesn't use self-destruct and Skarmory again, are you fucking serious? Maxie is trying to turn Cosmo's meteorite into a megastone to reawaken Groudon. This has changed from the original games where Maxie's plan was to use the power of the meteorite to expand the landmass by making Mount Chimney erupt. Which is bloody psychotic. I much prefer this new version. It's established that megastones come from meteorites anyway, so this is a tidy rewrite. Maxie challenges you with a team of level 25s, with his Mighty Ina being the biggest threat because it's obnoxious. It keeps using Roar to force your Pokemon to switch, and in my case it kept dragging out Lanoon, who's not supposed to be battling. Maxie's defeat so early in the game is completely belittling. He claims that he was taking it easy and still hasn't unleashed his full power, but in storytelling what is said doesn't make as much of an impression as what is done. And what Maxie does is take a very easy defeat and then gets clearly flustered when you beat him. So despite being the main villain, all of your future encounters are now sapped of all of their weight. This is one of the narrative problems with the leveling up system. You have a clear numerical indication of how strong Maxie is. And to be honest with you, level 25 just isn't that impressive. I can't really see a solution to that problem though, other than, obviously, to not have him fight you until the end. But even then you'd have to make up a bunch of excuses as to why he doesn't just trounce you, so whatever, I'll just leave it. To get back down Mount Chimney, you need to head south to Jagged Pass, an area that's distinct in both visuals and design. It's not as breezy or open as most routes in the game, it's quite claustrophobic with a lot of starting and stopping because of the ledges. You need the Acro bike to completely clear this area. In principle, both bikes are designed to change the way you interact with the level geometry. The problem is that if you want to see everything, you often have to play the level, recognise that you've missed some stuff, return to Moville, change your bike, come back, and then play the level again. And if you were using your preferred bike in the first place, like I was, you then have to go and do all of that again afterwards. If you're not fussed about being thorough, then this isn't such a big problem. You would just have to decide whether or not it's worth wasting your time for one item. But I don't think that you should have to ask yourself if you can be arsed collecting an item. Having to do a route twice just isn't an appealing proposition no matter how you slice it. So all of that work was to get up this tiny wee ledge. Do you remember when I said that routes 101 through 104 were designed for navigation in both directions? I also said that that kind of level design disappears as the game goes on. This is the most egregious example that I can think of. Even once you've gained access to the gondola, it's a pain to get to Laveridge. You have to go up the gondola and down the jagged pass. It is a massive level design contrivance for your first time through the story. This is one instance where I would rather have had one of those artificial roadblocks here rather than a ledge. The herb shop in Laveridge is a good excuse to talk about friendship. Friendship is a mechanic wherein your Pokemon grow to like you more or less depending on how well you meet their needs, just like friends in real life. But unlike in real life, these conditions aren't exactly difficult to fulfill. They involve walking with the Pokemon, leveling them up, and using certain items on them. High friendship has a few benefits. It largely affects the evolution of certain Pokemon like Golbat and Azurill, both of whom can only evolve with high friendship. It also affects the power of two moves, Return and Frustration. Lowering your Pokemon's friendship is actually a lot more difficult than it is to raise it. If they faint, it lowers by a minuscule amount, and the only other way to lower their friendship is to use herbs that can be bought from this shop. So the choice is this: do you spend less money but have your Pokemon dislike you, or do you spend more money to keep your Pokemon happy? For me, money is really easy to come by in these games, so I never bother using them. To make the choice more tempting, you would need to make money scarcer. But to be honest, I suspect that Game Freak don't really care that much about the mechanic, which is fair enough. It's a decent idea, but I can see why they don't want to add too much weight to a hidden stat. The visuals of Laveridge Gym really show off how much the graphical overhaul benefited the game. Before, it wasn't clear what everything was supposed to be, but now it's themed around geysers and hot springs. It's the perfect fit for a fire gym. Since Blaziken is currently my only team member not weak to fire, I thought I'd give his new evolution a bit of a test run. This is one of the modular bits of Pokemon that I love. I have to face this gym with a poorly matched team.
So you want to blow fat scale your clouds, change the amount of detail it has, and also lets you quickly generate new variations. This way we can render out all sorts of clouds, create a whole weather system, so with Blender open anti-disestablishmentarianism to default cube, replace it with a better one, and head over to the shading workspace with the viewport set to rendered mode. And here we're going to be creating a volumetric material, which Eevee initially doesn't render nicely, so to fix this, just go to the render tab and bump up your sample count, bring down your tile size, and enable volumetric space with the viewport set to rendered mode. And here we're going to be create a cube, replace it with a better tile size, and enable volumetric shadows with more samples. Now to actually make our procedural clouds or gameplay, bring down your tile size and enable volumetric shadows with more samples. Now to actually make our procedural clouds, our game plan is to create a a volumetric sphere inside our cube, resize our mesh so the volume is more cloud-shaped, change up the lighting for a better overall look, and finally adding some procedural noise to deform our volume. And before we start messing with nodes, just make sure to pick up an HDRI from HDRI Haven, and you should also... So starting off with our volumetric sphere, we can make this by replacing the principled BSDF with the gradient texture set to quadratic sphere. Add in a mapping node to the vector input, and use this to resize and position our volume. Vector set to quadratic sphere, add in a mapping node to the vector input, and use this to resize and position our volume. Finally, send this through a principled volume node using the density socket with the color set to white, and to make this visible again, just multiply our gradient texture by some large number. Using the density socket with the color set to white, and to make this visible again, just multiply our gradient texture by some large number. In other words, all we've done so far is created this node network to make our volumetric sphere, and to be honest, all this talking has made me pretty tired, so I'm handing it over to my girlfriend for the next few steps.
Thank you, CG Matt. So our next step is to resize our volume into something more cloud-shaped, and since we're using generated coordinates, all we have to do is resize the mesh, which will also deform the interior. Now for better lighting, we can just make a simple 2-point lighting setup using area lights, and for the environment, just head over to World, add an environment texture node to our setup using area lights, and for the environment, just head over to World, add an environment. Simply have to do is resize setup using area lights. lights, and for the environment, just head. For better lighting, we can just make a simple 2-point lighting. Setup using area lights, and for the environment, just head over to World, add an environment texture node to our background, and load in the HDRI you got from HDRI Haven. Finally, to disable this in the viewport, we can go to the Render tab and under Film, enable Transparent. Back to you, CG Matter.
Now the last step is to deform our volume with some procedural noise, and to do this just add a noise texture set to 4D, use a vector math node. To add this to the generated coordinates and noise, and to do this just add a noise texture set to 4D, use a vector math node to add this to the generated coordinates, and adjust the position and size until everything is inside our mesh. This way we can control the shape with our noise scale, the cloud detail with the noise detail, and generate new clouds using the W slide. We can control the shape with generated procedural noise, and to do this just add a noise texture set to 4D. Now the last step is
viewport. We can go to the render tab. And they into some
to white, and to make this visible again, just multiply our gradient texture by some large number. In other words, all we've done so far is created this node network to make our volume.
Thank you, CG coordinates. All we have to do is reset setup to the render tab.
Procedural noise, and to do this, just add a noise texture set to 4D. Use a vector math node to add this to the generated procedural noise, and to do this, just add a noise texture set to 4D. Use a vector math node to add this to the generated coordinates, and adjust the position and size until everything is inside our mesh. This way we can control the shape with our noise. Scale the cloud detail with the noise detail and generate new clouds using the W slider. We can also add a color ramp node to control our cloud fall off, and a CG matter approved trick is to use an object info node slider. We can also add a color ramp node to control our cloud fall off, and a CG matter approved trick is to use an object info node to randomize our W values so duplicated clouds all look slightly different. Matter approved trick is to use an object info node to randomize our W values so duplicated clouds all look slightly different. And now that we know how to make procedural clouds, we need to render them in some way that doesn't take forever, and our sponsor for this video, Concierge Render, offers a GPU render for 2. Now it's rendering like this. Data and automatically pack our files, and in the Concierge Render home screen, to launch complete, you'll see all the stats for this job along
gym, so it becomes a wee bit more intimidating for me than it likely will be for many other players. I can imagine that if you chose Mudkip at the beginning, you wouldn't even think twice about this gym, whereas I was a bit more trepidatious. I decided to see how it went. Types in general are just a really great system. The fact that Pokemon can have 2 types means that there are an incredible 171 potential types that a Pokemon can be. But there's a much smaller pool of strengths and weaknesses to actually remember. Remembering 18 types and their relationships might sound like a tall order, but the game helps you along by rooting its relationships in context. This is why the starters should always be grass, fire and water in my opinion. The reasoning is incredibly clear. It's obvious to even the youngest of children that fire burns plants, water douses fire and grass grows in water. If you chose a more nebulous type trio like Psychic, Dark and Fighting, you can imagine that some stuff would be lost in translation. There are a couple of head scratchers in Pokemon like, but you can generally see some semblance of logic. Psychic is good against fighting as it's mind over matter. Dark and Bug are good against Psychic as they're common fears. Fire and Poison are good against Fairy due to their association in folklore, and so on and so forth. Starting with Generation 6, types now grant Pokemon certain bonuses. Fire-type Pokemon can't be burned, Grass-type Pokemon are unaffected by Spore moves, Ghost-type Pokemon can't be trapped, Poison-type Pokemon can't be poisoned and gain 100% accuracy with the move Toxic, and so on. It makes a lot of sense and helps distance the types further from one another. The type system also justifies itself by encouraging, if not outright forcing players to maintain a well-rounded team. I think a lot of us will remember being kids and having a Charizard with Ember, Fire Spin, Flamethrower and Fire Blast. If you do, you probably also remember hitting a hard roadblock at some point and having to reconsider your approach. The type system discourages you from brute forcing your way through pouring all of your experience into a single Pokemon. It encourages you to build a more rounded team. So I think that the system is really good and fairly well balanced at this point. I can't think of a single type that is definitively useless. Even if they're not all balanced equally, I think it's preferable that they all have their own characteristics. So in conclusion, the type system is fantastic, at least on paper. I have a lot of issues with the implementation, but we'll get to that later on. Flannery is one of the best characters in the game in my eyes. She's new to being a gym leader and feels like she needs to put on a facade to live up to that role. So she's trying well too hard, she's forcing it and she's sloppy as a result. This might say more about me than I intend it to, but I find that really relatable. Anyway, we get some tidbits from other NPCs saying that she's often found looking after the local kids and that, so she's obviously not an aloof person. It's a funny and understated bit of character development that makes her seem more human, and it's great that an arc is conveyed so naturally in such a tight space. One wee touch I didn't notice until this playthrough is, if you look on the pillars in the gyms from now on, you can actually see that Wally is a certified trainer. It's a great way to remind you that he exists without pushing it in your face. And speaking of rivals, May ambushes you again and gushes about how incredible and talented you are. She then hands you an item called the Go Goggles, and then immediately offers to let you completely bypass the desert where you need to use them by travelling straight back to Petalburg. Now, admittedly, Petalburg is more out of the way from Lava Ridge, but I have the same complaint as I did last time. The level design wraps around seamlessly. It's the matter of a few minutes to head back to Moville and then head through Rustturf Tunnel and finally Petalburg Woods. As for me, I'm going to do neither. I've opted to stay here and check out the hot springs. The hot springs do nothing, but they characterise Lava Ridge as a more relaxed town. I wish your character's idle animation were removed when he was bathing, as he doesn't seem quite so relaxed, but whatever. Now that we're halfway through collecting the gym badges, I think this is a worthwhile time to take a break and talk about why Pokemon is such a fun and relaxing experience for me. Pokemon as a series, I feel, is very unchallenging. Omega Ruby specifically has a relaxed, tropical feel, but also a gentle feeling of adventure, which reminds me very much of going on holiday. In fact, Masuda actually based Hoenn on his childhood holidays to Kyushu, which he has fond, vivid memories of. To add to this holiday vibe, you play as a character who doesn't need to go to school, and whose only responsibility is to go on an adventure across an unfamiliar land with his magical pets. And this illusion is never broken either, it's a perpetual adventure with your friends, day and night. I think this is what makes the series so appealing to children. I used to daydream about going on a Pokemon adventure of my very own rather than going to school. But the adventure is never too adventurous. The stakes are never too high, and you're never too far from a safe space. The series' unchallenging nature means that the games rely on an inbuilt sense of nostalgia, in that everything is very rose-tinted. And I don't mean that as a condemnation. Playing a Pokemon game is like putting on a comfy pair of slippers. When I'm feeling down, there is nothing on earth that cheers me up quite like a Pokemon game. And I think it achieves this in a number of ways. The scenario is very safe. You're on what effectively amounts to a hike with no consequences to losing. The melodies are simple and upbeat, and the story is usually fairly relaxed as well, only really ramping up briefly after the 7th gym. The Pokemon world is also a utopia. What ethical or systemic issues do exist are either sidestepped or confirmed to not be a problem. Tying into this nostalgic approach, I find that Pokemon is a game best enjoyed when you're in the mood for it. I actually wasn't too taken with the last few games in the series, as I got them as soon as I was able to. But with Omega Ruby, I waited until I was in the mood for it and had a much better experience. That might be a massive reason why I'm so fond of this game, despite it not being the most well received. And while I'm trivialising it here, like I say, I don't mean any of this as a criticism. I just think it's interesting that there seems to be a bit of a continuity of these seamless fantasy worlds becoming insanely popular. The other example that I would use is Harry Potter, a world where you go to school to learn how to be a wizard and have sleepovers with your friends every night. Harry's adventures, well, the early ones anyway, have a sense of security to them. They mostly take place within spitting distance of his bed. And all of the potentially problematic elements have been either shaved off or aren't addressed. My point is that we all love a bit of escapism, so even though its form or content isn't always the best, Pokemon has a particular appeal that I think transcends that, at least for me. That's why I find it so fun and relaxing. It's my go-to escapist fantasy. I've rambled on for so long that it's now turned into daytime. That poor lad probably looks like a prune at this point. The day-night cycle is largely aesthetic in this game. Unlike in previous generations, it doesn't affect the encounter rate of the Pokemon, or anything else for that matter. Hoenn was never designed for a day-night cycle. For some reason, Game Freak removed it from Generation 3, maybe to better fit the game's tropical feel. And to be honest with you, I kind of prefer that kind of decision making, where they're like, right, this feature is superfluous, so let's get rid of it. The feature was really impressive and innovative in Generation 2, but it's an afterthought here. It feels like more of a holdover. All in all though, I'd probably say that it's better to include it. There's a certain atmosphere to seeing things during the day and night. Like the Jagged Pass, the desert on Route 111 doesn't just look different, it feels feels slightly different to play. A sandstorm is constantly raging, which chips off 1/16 of your Pokemon's health at the end of each turn, unless they're rock, ground, or steel type. So you have to choose for yourself how you play around it. Do you just tank the damage and heal it off? Do you exclusively use rock, ground, or steel types? Or do you overwrite it with another weather effect? I wouldn't want all of the routes to be like this, of course, but I do think it's a refreshing change of pace. Weather is generally well thought through, benefiting multiple types and thus making it a more viable option in different situations.
Who could have seen this coming? Ah, yeah, that'll leave a divot in your forehead. Oh man, that's great. I can't. I can't.
I hate.
Sun aids fire and certain grass Pokemon, rain aids water and certain grass Pokemon, and sandstorm aids rock, ground and steel type Pokemon. The only exception to this is hail, which only seems to ever really benefit ice type Pokemon. It's got very little synergy and I think maybe something could be done with that. Speaking of weather, actually, I also want to thank the good Lord above that they finally changed how it was displayed. Previously, the game would interrupt you every single turn to describe the weather effect that you already know is happening. Now, there's simply a prompt when the weather begins and ends, and the game just keeps the relevant graphic on the bottom screen. It's a lot less intrusive. This is exactly the kind of streamlining effort that Pokemon needs more of. I caught the next member of my team here, Trapinch. Trapinch's final evolution, Flygon, was originally going to have Mega evolved in Omega Ruby, but apparently Ken Sugimori, who's the lead artist and one of the driving forces behind Pokemon, got artist's block. I love that bit of trivia, it's really humanising. That man has designed hundreds upon hundreds of monsters by this point, but even he still has trouble with it. I've gone ahead and named my Trapinch Specky because hiding in the ground and then bursting out at folk sounds a wee bit like the behaviour of an unsound Specky Napals. Route 111 must at one point have been a sea, as stated by one of the NPCs in a nice example of intrinsic learning. I don't know how much sense any of this makes geographically, but it suggests that the desert was once a bay, evoking the game's major theme of land versus water. The sea dried up to create more land, which is exactly what Team Magma's trying to do. This suggests then, without using words, that if Team Magma do succeed, it might not be the paradise that they're expecting. Somebody go and give one of those big YouTubers a call, there's a really fucking boring theory video in there somewhere. You can also pick up the root or claw fossil in the desert, which can be resurrected to become prehistoric Pokemon. I've chosen the claw fossil as personally I prefer Armaldo, but I don't intend to use either of them. It's a great idea to scatter optional Pokemon throughout the game, rather than have the starters be the only example of this. But the setup here is terrible. Somehow you know for a fact that once you lift one fossil, the other will sink. With that in mind, you've got two hands, why not just grab them both? The level design for this, on the other hand, is spot on. Our next destination after this is of course Petalburg, and the easiest way to get there is of course to cut through Rust Turf Tunnel, which takes us to Rustboro, where we can resurrect the fossil at the Devon Corporation. Do you see why I'm so indignant at the game constantly trying to teleport me? The Petalburg gym comes very soon after the last one. It uses the normal type, but its gimmick is that each trainer prioritizes a different stat. Each one will start the match by using a particular stat boosting item on their Pokemon, but the execution is rough. Each trainer uses only a single Pokemon and they will always use their first turn on a stat buff. So you've got plenty of room to maneuver, especially as you likely have a good few Pokemon on your side at this point. It's a real shame because if this was implemented better, this could have been a really good tutorial for how effective buffs and debuffs could be. But as it stands, since they're so ineffective, the player isn't likely to learn, and in a worst case scenario they might reach the conclusion that buffs are worthless. I mentioned in Lavaridge Gym how I thought that Pokemon's otherwise excellent type mechanics were poorly implemented. The biggest problem is the monotype design of the trainers and bosses. Gyms almost exclusively use a single type, making it extremely easy to beat them by choosing a super effective Pokemon. This might have been a decent wee teaching tool, teaching the player about different type matchups, but the doorman actually explains which Pokemon you should be using as soon as you walk in. I also think it's a flawed idea to have the boss of each area function as a teaching tool. Gym leaders are supposed to be a moment of heightened difficulty, but they're incredibly easy. You just have to select one super effective Pokemon to win. You've seen throughout this playthrough how I've basically picked a Pokemon with a type advantage and then swept each gym. The game also prompts you to switch every single time a trainer sends in another Pokemon, making it impossible to be taken by surprise. As if that weren't easy enough, gyms are always located in a town, or in other words, right outside of a Pokemon Center. And again, the trainers won't re-challenge you, so even if you're struggling, you are always a few seconds away from a complete recharge. Regular trainers suffer from some of these problems as well. They're often categorized into classes like swimmers, who use water types, and hikers, who use rock and fighting types. Like gym trainers, they also prompt you to switch every time you defeat a Pokemon, and they don't re-challenge you if you head back to a Pokemon Center. They are slightly better all round though, as you will encounter different trainer classes along the same route, and the Pokemon Center is often much further away. There are also classes like Ace Trainers who don't specialise in any one type. So it creates this weird structure. Pokemon is never quite marrying its challenge with its level design. The routes are often structurally more difficult, featuring multiple types and being further away from a Pokemon Center, but simultaneously they're also easier because the trainers aren't as strong. In the gyms, it's vice versa. The trainers are generally more difficult, but the structure is much easier. By refusing to double down and create definitively tough areas, the game becomes incapable of creating tense or climactic moments. Gyms being in towns makes no sense. They put the toughest bosses in the most relaxed areas. Imagine if gyms were instead placed at the end of routes or dungeons. The game would build towards the boss as you battled your way up the route and through the gym. You would also be completely out of your comfort zone. There wouldn't be a Pokemon Center right outside that you could use as a crutch, and you couldn't rely on a single Pokemon to dish out super effective moves to get you through the routes. That would still be a problem in the gyms themselves, mind you, but I'm here to moan, not design a game. Coincidentally, Wally and his father happen to be right outside the gym, ready to give you surf as soon as you need it. If they had spread it out a wee bit so you got surf before coming back to Petalburg, this might have been less conspicuous, but of all the complaints in this video, that's really low priority. I like the way that the parents interact in these games. I like that there's a bit of characterization with them reminiscing about their child getting older. It makes a lot of sense for a game about growth. I promise this is the last time this complaint will be cropping up, but I was furious to find that Wally forces you back to Moville with him. This annoys me even more than the other times for a few reasons. Most obviously, I'm not even given the option to refuse. The game decides for you that there is absolutely no reason that anybody would want to stick around Petalburg, but there are loads of reasons. Firstly, there's a lot to do around here. Hoenn's multi-tiered level design has water sections in Petalburg City and the northern part of Route 104, replete with hidden items to collect. Secondly, there are the 5 sea routes and Sea Moville that can be explored right now from the southern part of Route 104. Doing so will deposit you neatly at Slateport City, which puts Moville a short trip up Cycling Road. And lastly, if you just want to carry on with the story, the level design neatly winds itself back around to keep backtracking to a minimum. Simply cross the body of water on Route 103 and you'll be deposited at the bottom of Route 110. On your way you'll even pass the trick house in case you want to polish that off while you're at it. This is great level design, giving the player loads of options and tying itself seamlessly back together. But it is completely spoiled by the designer's utter horror at the thought that their players might have to think a tiny bit. Game Freak is so paranoid about their players' willingness to play the game that they ushered you away from 5 entire routes worth of content. It's ridiculous. And that this happens 3 times suggests that either the designers didn't appreciate how well crafted the map is, or they did but chose to ignore it because they're terrified that their audience are morons. Man, sometimes it's just nice to be able to find your own way back rather than being funneled through a story. I stubbornly trekked straight back to Petalburg so I could show you the content. HMs in general make very little sense, and Surf is a prime example of this. Your Pokemon battling in the surface of the water is one thing, but moreover, how does Trapinch use Dig on the water? I know that this is a really overused joke, but how does a tiny bird fly a human to another location? How does a tiny fish allow you to ride on its back? How do your Pokemon breathe underwater when you use Dive? How does your Pokemon cut down a tree when it's already fainted? This might well be an inevitable concession that has to be made for them to work, but for me it's just one of the many reasons that I dislike HMs. You wouldn't be able to put this in recklessly, and certainly not in Hoenn, but it might be interesting if the HMs restricted your options in some way. If you couldn't use ground type moves while surfing, for example, it would at least justify the environmental shift mechanically. But as it is, you just press A in front of water and then it's just like playing the game normally. I've had to cut out a substantial amount of routes 105 through 109. They're all but featureless straight lines with a few trainers dotted around. The remake is faithful to the original games to a fault. This can be considered a very good thing. The original games did get a lot right first time. But, for example, the game is still designed on a grid despite the fact that the player can move in full 360. The grid is a rigid and unnatural choice, presumably used to accommodate the Game Boy's limited memory. To see it retained like this in full 3D with an analog stick is slow progress to say the least. A more pertinent example though is that even though the sea routes were lambasted by almost everybody that played the games, they're still in the remakes virtually unchanged. This strikes me as a prime opportunity to fix the biggest complaint with the originals, but for whatever reason they didn't. I'm having a wee bit of difficulty training Trapinch here because of its typing. Now normally I'd be ready to praise this as it speaks volumes about Pokemon's customizable nature. I can either forego training Trapinch, forego clearing these routes, or I can push through while at a disadvantage. It says a lot about the game's customization that I'm being forced to make decisions about how I approach a fairly standard route, decisions that I reckon a majority of people won't even think about. And vice versa too, I might breeze through certain areas that give other people trouble. It's these kind of dynamics that make it a lot of fun to plan out a new Pokemon playthrough. The problem is though that this game takes it well too far. All I encounter here are water types, which gets boring and discourages the use of certain Pokemon for huge scores of the game. Happily, Trapinch survives the gauntlet and comes out of Ibrava. It's a much more useful Pokemon. It gets a Dragon type and the ability Levitate, which grants it a host of useful resistances and an immunity to ground moves. However, its attack is now lower than it was. Interestingly, Trapinch has the same attack stat as its final evolution. It's based on the antlion, an insect whose larvae burrow into the sand until they're old enough to undergo metamorphosis. It's also, obviously, a play on Dragonfly, hence the dragon typing. But like I was saying with Azurill and Mawile, it's not bug type and you would think that it would be. If you take Route 103 directly from Petalburg City, you're deposited in front of the Trick House. I reckon that a lot of players will have forgotten all about it, so I like how the level design reminds you about it like this, especially as you can just go ahead and finish it right now if you're so inclined. I'm going to go through all of the puzzles just now and give you my thoughts as I go. The structure of the puzzles is the same throughout. You want to find a scroll which teaches you a special password and then inscribe that password on the door to exit. It's a silly little idea, but unlike a lot of the game's silly little ideas, it revels in that fact. The trick master keeps disappearing with no explanation. He completely renovates the back of his house every time he makes a puzzle. He makes all of these seemingly sentient mechanical dolls. And what's more, he seems to just be doing it for a laugh. Everybody inside seems just as baffled as the player is about him. It's like a mad Japanese game show, an angle that's played up perfectly. The quote-unquote puzzle in the first two mazes is just cut the trees and smash the rocks. These mazes might have been a wee bit more difficult if the camera weren't overhead. As it is, they're not so much puzzles as checks that you have the appropriate HM. The puzzle that follows this makes better use of the perspective by obfuscating your character behind iron roofs. It makes no sense from your character's perspective, of course, they would easily be able to find their way, but that's not intrusive. I didn't even think about that when I was playing. The next maze requires strength and is immediately a much better puzzle than the first two because you only need to activate it once. There are no trainers here either, so this maze removes all of the interruptions and allows you to concentrate on the actual brain teaser. And thankfully so, as that brain teaser is quite good. It requires precision and forethought to get through, with a few devious little traps that mean you can actually fail. It's not the greatest puzzle in gaming history or anything like that, but it's a veritable leap in quality from the last few. The next puzzle involves the game asking hilariously esoteric questions about itself. I get the impression that you're not honestly supposed to get through this first time. Even I'm not mental enough to remember the exact price of items, for example. The last question's pretty cheeky as well. It asks how many NPCs give you berries in the Pretty Petal flower shop. Can't believe it's made me say that again. There are actually 4 NPCs in the shop, but only one gives you berries. I wonder how many people got caught out by that. I love how obtuse the game is here. It feels like it knows how ridiculous it's being and wants you to laugh along with it. The trick house bows out on a high note. It's a fun, breezy little maze that makes use of spatial awareness, process of elimination, and perspective. Again, it seems the designers had some fun with this. The final set of tiles have you flirting with the exit, teasing you with the prospect that you'll be whisked away from it before finally letting you go. So I really like the trick house. It feels like the designers were having a laugh making it, which I really appreciate. But all the same, I don't think I would like to see it return. While this would remove some of the quirkiness, I think some of these puzzles would be put to better use if they were scattered across Hoenn. The rest of the game is fairly light on puzzles as it is, and packing 6 into this one optional area seems like a bit of a waste. The pacing is never quite optimal. You can either do all 6 at once, which is a huge spike in puzzle density, or you can come back every once in a while, which is an interruption. We're going to carry on with the actual game now by crossing this channel on Route 118. You'd expect there to be a bridge here or something, considering that this appears to be the only connection between the two halves of Hoenn. It could even be a broken one to justify why you have to surf, but anyway. The level design and pacing complement each other perfectly here. Up until this point, the game was structured around Moville, which was central to Western Hoenn. You travel around this area collecting 4 badges, and then you're finally allowed to face off with Norman. Defeating your dad was flagged up right at the start as the first major task to work towards. Your dad is, of course, a patriarchal figure, and surpassing him perfectly ties into the game's themes of growth. You've finally managed to outdo him, meaning that he no longer occupies that position of power over you. You're then allowed to move on to pastures anew, both thematically and mechanically, as you find yourself moving eastwards away from Moville. It kinda feels like you're moving out from under your father's shadow, and the game marks this by moving you geographically away from this centralised area. I always felt kind of elated and empowered at this point, and ready to carry on with my adventure. It was a nice wee boost of speed. I think it's important that the game gives you this boost. I can imagine that some more casual players might get fatigued upon realising that, despite all their work, they're still only at the halfway mark. Giving them the 5th badge immediately after the 4th is a nice wee boost, and it encourages people to carry on until the story picks up again. After surfing across the body of water, you find Stephen Stone. He asks you whether you prefer to use your favourite types, or whether you prefer to keep a variety of Pokemon. The game glorifies the player's choice a lot, telling them that they can use their favourites. This is almost essential narratively, but the game's mechanics don't respond well to it. It's never a good idea to keep a monotype team. Latias then appears before us. This is our first hint that we get that Stephen might have more going on than meets the eye. A legendary beast appears specifically to him seeking help, and he seems to know it. Southern Island has been completely redesigned from the originals, and I think this gave the designers an opportunity to make something wonderful. Don't get me wrong, the rest of the game looks good, but it's difficult not to wish that the backgrounds were more like this. The waterfalls make this feel more mystical and give the route a lot of depth, making it feel a lot more three-dimensional than the rest of the routes. Latias came to fetch Stephen because Team Magma are being bampots again, quelle surprise. This time they're after Latios, as it's said to hold the secret to Mega Evolution. We're introduced to the other Magma admin, Courtney, who winds me up something awful because she never talks like a human being. She is the most egregious example of a tiresome anime cliche. She's the robotic waifu type, being all reserved and mechanical, but crucially, she's also designed to be cute. She wears a figure-hugging hoodie come miniskirt with a hood that's too big for her bonds. So while you're getting a good look at her figure, she can curry into her hood, making her look more shy and innocent. To complete the image, she takes a special interest in you, one that's implicitly sexual. She even slurps at you after you beat her, which I think is supposed to be her licking her lips. There's a musical note there as well, so, like, what, you beat her and then she goes... Anyway, basically, you beat her at Pokemon and that turns her on, the dirty cradle robber. You're supposed to be like 10. I guarantee there's at least one hentai doujin out there where commencing experiment is used as a sexual innuendo, which is fine, send me the link, but I don't think it's the kind of thing you should be putting into the game. I hate being pandered to, and that's what this is, it's just pandering. After defeating Team Magma, you're then handed Latios, as well as the means to Mega Evolve it. You don't have to try, you don't have to capture it, you don't have to complete any challenges except for defeating a couple of Magma Grunts. The game just forces a powerful, Mega Evolving Pokemon on you and sends you on your way. And when I say forces, I mean it. You're unable to refuse to take Latios, or even send it back to the PC. The trade-off with legendaries used to be that they were incredibly powerful, but difficult to catch and train, often appearing just before the Pokemon League. But here, just after the halfway mark, the player has both a legendary Pokemon as well as the EXP share handed to them as mandatory parts of the game's story, and any illusions of difficulty are firmly snapped over one knee. Now, before I make that statement, I think that the alternative needs to be considered. Pokemon being too easy is a difficult statement to prove as it has so many variables, and I'm tending towards effective ones. I'm particular about my Pokemon choices, I'm leaving the EXP share on, and I'm thorough in fighting trainers. The fact is, I've been playing these games for ages, and I'm putting more thought into it than a child would. You could probably make a convincing case that the game isn't too easy, and that I'm just too much of a sad sack. And I mean, you're not wrong, I am a sad sack, but I think my complaint is legitimate nonetheless. It's just that I might choose to rephrase it. It's too easy to make the game too easy. The game is far too willing to hand you the tools to break it. This was apparently a deliberate choice. The games have been made easier as players have less time to play them and more games to play, which I begrudgingly have to admit makes sense from a designer's perspective. But I feel like game designers shouldn't be accommodating apathy. I don't understand why you would take into account the attitude of people that don't care. I don't feel like I'm being elitist with that. I'm not trying to be anyway. I'm not saying that Pokemon needs to be hardcore, but if your player can't be bothered playing, then there's no point bending over backwards for them. Latios and the EXP share aside, the player has even more options available to make the game easier. On Route 103, for example, you can use the Dex Nav to farm lucky eggs from the Pelipers. So you can search around for a Pelipper, find one with a lucky egg, catch it or use Thief, and then receive an item that gives the Pokemon holding it 150% experience. I'm not using the lucky eggs myself, but if I were to grind for 6 of them, which is easily doable, I would be gaining 525% experience with the EXP share on. Of course, the lucky eggs aren't that obvious, so it'd be a bit unfair to count it towards the game's difficulty problems. But the EXP share, Latios, optional routes, and the clearly flagged weaknesses for most of the bosses are not exploits or hidden tricks, and they are more than enough to trivialise the game on their own. Of course, the great thing about Pokemon is its customization. If I'm having too easy a time, I could restrict which Pokemon I caught, or turn the EXP share off, or even do a challenge run like a Nuzlocke. But there isn't the incentive to do this. There's no benefit to turning the EXP share off. There's no decision to be made there unless you deliberately want to handicap yourself. Basically, I think there ought to be a limit to how easy a player can make the game for themselves. Choosing weaker or stronger Pokemon is a good influence on the game's difficulty and should be enough. Clearly marking a boss's weakness, giving the player a Mega Evolving Legendary Pokemon for free, and giving the player the chance to quintuple their EXP intake is taking it too far. And this isn't a small problem, because if you're playing the game without handicaps, i.e. if you're playing the game normally, it becomes so trivial that it becomes unengaging. We can only access a small bit of Route 123 at the minute. The rest of the route is blocked off by a complicated jigsaw puzzle of ledges. It's impossible to see the entirety of the route in one pass. You have to keep flying back to the other end of the route and then taking a different route down the ledges. It's a fairly tedious setup. It feels like they just went with the idea because they didn't have anything else to put here. So this is a route that you're supposed to access later on from the other end, which is why I suspect this Aroma Lady has a Vileplume. It's such a spike in strength from everything else you can see just now that I suspect it was an oversight. If the game weren't so bloody easy, then it might have even been a problem. The small bit of Route 123 that we can access just now includes the Berry Master. The Berry Master's wife is a strange anomaly. The player has the chance to get a special berry from her every day, but only if they respond to her phrases in a very specific way. For example, if she says something contest, you need to spell out challenge in all caps. If she says something Latios, you need to say overwhelming, but if she says something Latios, you need to say cool. There's no way to work this out. There are no clues or anything, you just have to know. It's a hidden thing, sure, but that's pretty shoddy.
Good.
There's a place where the sun doth shine and the birds keep time with the pines up yonder. That's the home of my Caroline. She's dancing in the sky. Oh, how sweet when we meet on the golden streets of the great white valley. These old chains